Hey guys, today I'm going to talk about typography in Bricks Builder and avoiding FOUC or flash of unstyled content. We're also going to look at using either static fonts or variable fonts served locally, and also look at some of the quirks in Bricks that currently exist. And something I learned here today while I was preparing for this, I've actually been through this, recorded this video. I'm doing a second round because what I found is that I'm actually, as I said in my previous video, I'm in Aurora tournament footballers at the moment, in a very noisy environment. And also, what I just discovered today is the internet latency is extremely variable. So I was experiencing yesterday pretty good internet and everything was working beautifully. Today, when I was explaining how to avoid FOUC, I was getting a lot of latency, sometimes up to 1.5 seconds, and I was getting FOUC even though I'd done other things that I needed to do to stop it from happening. So it was actually an interesting take that I hadn't experienced before, and talking a little bit about that. Maybe I'll get the latency and I'll be able to show you to it. Maybe it will have repaired itself by then and I won't see the latency. I'm not really sure yet. So what we've got here is a very, very simple page in Bricks where I've got a heading and I've got some copy, and I'm using no typography settings for the font family, and basically it is default. So if I look at this in the front end, and this is logged in with admin, I've got no caching whatsoever in place. If I do a Control and an F5, I'm using Windows, by the way. If you're using Mac, you might do it differently. I see no flash of unstyled content. So if you look at the heading here and the copy, it is a font style. If I do a Control F5, watch the spinner at the top there, watch the page load, there is no flash of unstyled content. It is the same typography all the way through. Now, if I go back to my builder, I'm going to go into my theme settings and go to typography. And for my body, which will affect the header as well, because I'm not going to set anything on the header stage, I select the Google font, and let's say I use Enter, because I know it's a sans serif font. Where is that? There it is, Enter, and hit the save on that. I'm going to have a look at the front end. See that flicker there? If I do a Control F5, watch the typography. See, I get a sans serif font, which looks like Times, and then it goes to Enter after a split second. See that? There's a little flicker. Then we'll flicker. If I have a look in my dev tools and my network and I filter by fonts, what I'll see if I do a Control F5, that took 377 milliseconds for that font to load. Interestingly, before, when I was doing this, I was getting 1 second delay, and I was seeing even more of this FOUC. So that was my latency for my internet here in my time. So we need to fix this. Now, if you're using something like Perf Matters or another optimization plugin, you can tell it to host your Google Fonts locally, and you can tell it to preload them. And that solves this problem in most cases. We're going to do this without using any caching. We're going to use it by changing the way we work with fonts and some Bricks settings. All right, so let's go back to our font and get rid of that. And the way we're going to do that to start with, we're going to create a custom font. So I'm going to go in here, I'm going to go into my font manager, and I'm going to add a new custom font. We need to know what is that font going to be first. So I'm going to head over to my Google Fonts. I'm just going to fonts.google.com. I'm going to use variable fonts here to start with. We're going to explain an issue a little bit later with using variable fonts, and then we'll take it from there. So I scroll down, so I get to the technology, and I only want to see variable fonts there. So this is all the Google variable fonts. Now what we want to do is pick one. So for example, if I look at Roboto, let's just start with Roboto. I click on Roboto. What does it mean to be a variable font? What does it mean to have 3 axes or 2 axes? The way you find out is you go into the font, you click on this type tester, and it'll show you what the axes are. So this one can be italic, you can change the weight, and you can change the width of the font. right? And it's fluid. So it's not set to a fixed value like a 400, 600, 800, etc. It is fluid, which is another thing that we can use if we're animating fonts, for example. And this one would actually be pretty good to use. At this point, I'm going to stop and talk about the difference between static and variable fonts. I've got a little notepad thing I've just put up here. So with variable fonts, the pros of it is they're very flexible for design. So from the one font file, you can vary all of the axes that it has. In this case, it's Roboto. I can switch it between normal and italic. I can switch the weight, vary the weight, and I can vary the width from the one font file from below. So it's very flexible. The values are fluid. So again, so the weight, you can actually animate the weight. See that there? You can animate that weight. Whereas static fonts are on the 400, the 500, 600, 800. It's a fixed value which you can't animate. Okay? And because it is a single font file, it's easier to work with. The cons are that they're not all created the same. So not all have the italic, weight, and width. In fact, let's have a look at another one. Let's have a look at, say, Open Sans. What do we got? 3 axes for Open Sans. And on Open Sans, what do we have? We have italic, weight, width, so that's the same. Let's go to another one. Like Enter, see what Enter's got. It's got optical size, italic, and weight, so it doesn't have the width. So these are very different variations than the other fonts. So we need to know what the font has to be able to use it. So let's say they're not all created the same. The files can be large. For example, and it depends on the complexity of the font and how many axes that it has and what kind of axes they have. I was looking at one variable font where it was like 300K. Looking at another variable font, which is nearly 5 meg to the one font, which was a Merriweather, I think it was. So it can be very large. And you need to take that into account. And there's things you can do with that, but that's one of the things. Whereas the other side of it is that not very well understood by many developers. So there's variation in how you use it. So you need to understand, where do I get the font from? Which is the right font? How do I use the font? It's not really well understood by a lot of developers, which is all of the basis of it today. Now, we'll look at static fonts. So static fonts is where you have a font, so it might be Roboto, and you have Roboto, weight 400 normal, weight 400 bold, weight 400 italic, and weight 400 bold italic. They're all separate files. So if you want those variations, you have to upload all of those files, and you have to access all of those files with your web page if you want to use them. So they're individual files, but they are a hell of a lot smaller. I was looking at one for Inter, where I think the ROF2, when I created it, was about 270K. But if I just looked at the normal normal 400, it was like 43K. So if I just wanted normal 400, normal 600, normal 800, and let's say the average 50K, that would be 150K files instead of 270. So it might make more sense to use the static files if you're looking for your file sizes divided. The static files might be more suitable, but they give you less flexibility. So you need to make that decision. And I'll actually just mention what those are. It creates more connections, which is not really an issue these days. There's more files to manage. This is if you're going to do preloading, caching, etc. You need to make sure that you include each of those font files in your preloading or pre-caching. So there's some pros and cons. I'm going to look at the variable fonts today because that gives us the most flexibility, but it does come with the downside of being larger. And I'll explain even with preloading where that could be an issue. Okay, so let's pick one. I think we said we're going to go with Roboto. Let's go with Roboto. Let's go back here to Roboto. We go to Roboto. And then we can look at where do we get this from. So if I hit the get font, And if there's something else, I'm going to get rid of that there. Just make sure we haven't got that already there. But Merriweather, I'm going to tear up my downloads. But we'll see exactly where these things are. Okay, so until I download this one file, which is our Roboto. And there it is there. Going to extract it. Okay, then we're going to have a look in here, and I'm going to see that my non-italic, the normal Roboto, which has my width and weight, is 458K. Notice something else. It is a TTF, true type font. We don't want that. We want to optimize font for our websites. I'm going to do something about that. So the way I used to do this, initially before I sort of understood about these axes, I would go over to this web fonts loader website, and I would type in Roboto, find that, and I would download this, and that would give me my WOF2 files automatically until I realized that, and sometimes that's okay, the only axis it has is the weight. So over in the Google type tester here, it's telling us that the look, our type tester here is telling us that we've got italic, weight, and width. These are the three axes it has, but it was WebDrive Motor. The WOF2 that is created is only including the weight, which is not what we want for this demonstration. If all you want to vary is the weight, then that could be a good option for you. Just download that. It's going to be a much smaller file, and you can use that, and you've got variable weight, and it's fluid, so you can animate weight, etc. Okay, so let's go back to here. So we've downloaded our Google font. It's a TTF, which is not what we want. So we're going to head over to I'm just going to type in WOF to converter or convert. And the first one we find is this Cloud Convert, which is exactly what we want. I love this one. It's so easy to use. I'm currently logged in as a Facebook user. We can log in with Gmail. You can log in with an email, create an account. It doesn't really matter because if you don't log in, you can, I think you convert up to 5 files at a time. If you do log in, you can convert a lot more. You don't have to sign in. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to say we want to convert a font from a TTF to a ROM. Here, Roboto, font weight width there, add convert.
Okay, and download the file.
I save it in my downloads, and we'll see something straight away. So this file here is 458K. It's a TTF. Look at our downloads. Here's the converted file, which is 205K with all the same features. So the WOF2 is way more optimized for web. So you should use these in all modern browsers. Will support WOF2. You don't need TTF. You don't need OTF. You don't need any other font format. WOF2, I believe, is all you need these days. All right, so let's head over to our bricks. And what we're going to do is we're going to call this Roboto variable. I like adding variables so we know this is a variable file. I'm going to add a variation. I'm going to select that. Put some residual stuff that I was playing with here. Pick that font from the downloads, which is 205K one. Stick that in that.
And it's select.
Now what we're going to do is go to our theme styles, typography, and for our body, we are going to now select our Roboto variable that we just create. Hit the save. Go to our test.
Now. Back.
And what we will see is if we go Control F5 now, we still see our FOUC. So even though we've said use a custom font and serve it locally, we're still seeing FOUC. Now, if we look here, here's my Roboto font there. This is my latency that I'm talking about. So that took 869 milliseconds to get that file. It's only 200K. That's a good thing for me to show you because you should not experience that. That should load a lot quicker than that. That has to do with the internet quality I'm getting here in Rarotonga today. I'm going to do a Control F5 again and see if we get the same. 600 milliseconds, and we've got a little bit less of the FOUC. So let's look at the next step. I'm going to go to the brick settings. And in my bricks settings, I'm going to go to my Performance tab. I'm going to tell it to preload my custom fonts. Save that.
And do a Control F5.
Okay, to view the page source up here. And look for preload. And what we see is this line here that has been added by Brick containing us to preload the custom files, where it's actually got a link, preload the arrrs. Now this is the part that I wasn't aware of. I was under the misguided impression that that would preload the font before displaying any text content. But what it tends to do is by having that there, it starts loading the font while it continues loading the rest of the page. So if that font file has loaded before it renders the text, then you don't get any FOUC. If this font file has not loaded before it starts rendering the text, you still get FOUC. So what this means is that if that file, if you large, but if you had a 1 meg or 2 meg WAV file that you're loading, and that took 1.5 seconds for it to load, but the rest of your page is already loaded, you're still going to see that FOUC because the font was not ready before the browser painted the initial paint of that text, then gets the font, and then it repaints it with the font that it actually just received. So that's a little lesson I learned there, and the only reason I looked that up is because of this latency. Now I'll just try doing my font again. See a very slight flicker then, but that was a 2.3 or 2.2 second time that took to load that font. Again, that's my internet. Control F5. That took 638 milliseconds for that font to load, but I didn't get any FOUC. That should be closer to what most people would see, right? But you can see that the smaller that file is, the smaller this file is, the quicker that's going to load, even if you have a high latency. I would say if you really absolutely want to get rid of all of your potential FOUC, and remember, this is only the first view of the page for that viewer. Once they do that, it's cached. So if I just press F5 now, it loads a lot quicker than it did just then because it's not loading that font again. It's all cached locally. So I think this is okay for me if I have the occasional time when I get high latency that I get a little bit of a flag, but most of the time it's okay. I think that's okay because the flexibility this gives us, having the variable font, is enormous compared to having a static font, and that's your choice in how you design. So how is it more flexible? Well, what we find is that when we now go into, let's say for our headings, for example, we go to headings, we make sure that's already on Roboto variable. We're going to change the font weight. Because we loaded a variable font, which does not include these font weight properties. In fact, not all do. This is where they're variables. Some do and some don't. So if I change the font weight there to 300, that changed. If I used Intel and I change the font weight, it doesn't change. So change it to 900. See, there's another thing raised there, is it? It's not working as you would expect it to work because this font weight is not properly supported in this particular variable font. So what we need to use is these font variation settings. Now, if you look in Google here and you go, okay, here's my axes for Roboto. If I look at that, click on that, it does give me a hint. This is ITAL. When you read the learn more, there's a lot to read, and it doesn't really clearly tell you what it does. Like this one's got WGHT, this one's got WDTH. If I learn more, it doesn't really give you great examples of how to use this. What I found the best way to do is to go to ChatGPT, type in explain. Actually, I'll just do this as a temporary chat. Explain, font, variation, setting. And this will give you a great rundown as to, do I type it wrong? Oh, I'm obviously T, okay? Anyway, it knows, and it's gone, this is how you use it. So it's the axis in quotes, the value, comma, the next axis in quotes, and the value. There's an example here where it's saying that it's going to give my weight of 700 and a width of 75. I'm just going to copy that. We don't need the semicolon. I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to go over to my type settings. I'm going to put that into my font variation settings, and there is my heading, and I've varied the width, and I've varied the weight. So if I made that a little bit less, I want 600, say 400, 300, 200, 100. We can vary it throughout this entire range. And it's not just the, let's set that to say 200. 200 there. And I like that at 75. You can go, and you got to play with this because these sliders on these, this should tell you the range. So it's from 100 down to 75, right? I found with some of these, if you go to say 50, that doesn't make any difference if I go 75. If I go 70, that doesn't make any difference if I get 80. That made it a little bit different. So this one actually is from 75. So if I go, say, 100, that's the full width. If I go 200, it kind of feels a little wider. I'm not really sure. I'm just going to change that back to 100. No, it's basically 75 to 100. So the Google Docs, the Google site here where it tells us that is correct. Okay, but it doesn't always, it's not always the case. All right. So what we're seeing here is we can vary that by using this weight. Okay, now here's where it gets really, really cool with these types of things here. Let's do some CSS on that. So let's grab this heading here. We're going to add some CSS. I'm going to do a font variation.
Not font. Variation.
Settings. And I'm going to go WGHT for maybe 200. That's like 300. So I've changed it there. And let's just use some nested CSS. So I'm just going to go and hover. And we'll grab that. And we'll say that's going to be 700. And we'll do a let's do a transition. Transition, I'll just do them all. 0.4 seconds ease.
Should be right.
That didn't work. Maybe my nested CSS isn't working properly, so I will grab that. Sometimes this nested CSS is not what it should be. Yeah, no, missing wasn't working. So look at that. What we can do here, we can set up a setting to, look at that. We can actually animate the boldness of this, which we can't do with a stack font. Let's change that to be the, what do we call it? Width. width 75 to width
well, 90. We go here. Here we go. We're animating the width
fluidly because we're not trying to change the space between the letters. It actually changes the width of the font. So you can see the actual width of the H here. It changes. Training changes, the width of the typography changes, and you can animate it in different circumstances. Right. And we've got no FOUC. If we go Control F5, no FOUC. So Control F5 again. Oh, we've got a little bit of FOUC there. What happened? 921 milliseconds it took for my page to load, for that font to load. So that is my latency that I'm getting that in Cook Islands here at the moment. Control F5 again. I get no FOUC there. That actually took me out the same amount of time. So it's all to do with high latency, is why I'm seeing that. 726 milliseconds in, no FOUC. Right. So that is my take on doing the using variable files over static fonts. There are benefits to it. There are drawbacks to it. The drawbacks would only, to me, be the file size, which is generally variable depending on the actual font you're looking at. So some of them are very large. Some of them are a little bit smaller. This one's not too bad at 205K. But that is compressed into a WOF2. That's not too bad for me. If I didn't want any of these features here where I wanted to vary the width, I would probably just get Roboto 400, Roboto 600, and install the static fonts and just use those. All right, so that's it to me. I think the next thing I'm going to talk about, apart from that, is some of the quirks. So in Bricks Buildup, the new font manager is when you go into the settings here, go in font manager. What we're found with this is that if you put a variable font in here, sometimes it shows up in the variable drop downs as all the weights, and sometimes it doesn't. So sometimes it just shows this one weight of 400. So that is one issue. The other thing is that not all variable fonts will actually respect that value. So it makes it a little bit quirky. The second thing is that if you want to add the italic version in here, you can, because what happens is if you try to select add another file here, so the italic version, and then you try to select either 400 or the normal, or 400, or you try to change it to italic, the UI won't accept it because it thinks it's a duplicate of what you've already got there. There's some UI issues with it. I think what they need is something that detects that this is a variable font, brings up the options that you actually have in that variable font, and then uses that as drop downs over here where you've got your here, which would be really cool if you could go in here and just say, instead of saying this font variation setting, you can have an option here where you can actually have pickers to drop down. We've got a weight, we've got a width, we've got italic, we've got optimum size, because it knows that that's what the variable font has. It would be much easier for people to use if you did that. Just notice here you got fallback fonts, so we were getting the I'm just going to set that to Arial. So that's so what I was noticing is that we do get the FOUC. Let's see if we can get FOUC happening.
No FOUC. Where's FOUC when you want it, eh? Where's FOUC when you want it? Just trying to get it to happen.
Maybe what I'll do is I'll turn off the
preload. And see what happens there.
That, even with the fallback font set to Arial. So bring our fallback font set to Arial. Let's just make sure we've saved that. So that's set to Arial. Try that again. Control F5. No, we get a sans serif font like Times. So I don't know what this fallback font is for. What does that actually do? Is it meant to show Arial before it loads this for? If it is, it's not doing it. But anyway, it's not very. I think that the guys at Bricks, they're brilliant. Everything they do is brilliant. I think they could do a lot more to make these very herbal fonts easier to use, make these more obvious to what they actually do, and then you're not guessing, you're not trying to find all the options that they have through here. You load the herbal font and it will tell you what you've got here. I think that would be a lot better. Yeah, anyway, I'm going to leave it at that. Hopefully this is valuable, because it was ideas to where you can and where you may not want to use variable fonts and what advantages and disadvantages it has. But that's where I'm currently sitting with these. I use them. I like the fact that we can vary them, and we vary the weight and if it has it, the width in a uniform, fluid way. So I'll keep using them for the foreseeable future anyway. All right, guys, I'm going to leave it at this. If you like this kind of thing, hit the subscribe, hit the like. Thanks for listening.